Hello, everybody. I'm Mark, and with me is Tyler. I have a podcast called Several Books, and the Odyssey is kind of the moment. So, what Tyler thought we could do was have a conversation about the Odyssey. As far as where qualifications go for the Odyssey, or discussing it, I have a minor in classics. I did study the Odyssey in school, but that was almost 20 years ago now. So it's been a long time since I've read it, and I only ever read it in translation. But I'll allow Tyler to introduce himself, and we can kind of figure out what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I brought up this topic because, of course, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is basically what everybody's seeing now. It feels like an actual true blockbuster. And I remember I had read at least parts of the Odyssey and maybe the Iliad back in, I'd say, either middle school and maybe high school as well. But I never really paid that much attention to it. But the movie has kind of renewed people's interest in it, including mine. And knowing your background in lit, and knowing that you've actually read the stories, the poems, I thought this might be kind of interesting to talk about on your channel. Um, and so, just a bit of a background about me. I'm actually Greek, or at least my mother was Greek. And the part of me is thinking about my ancestors when I watch this movie. All my family is talking about it, and all mainly about the scenery in the movie, but also, these things are talked about within Greek families a lot whenever Greece is mentioned. So, again, that's my personal angle here. But I am not uh, I have not read the full Odyssey, nor am I at all
Does
close
your
to an
family
expert in
know
it.
who Stavros is?
Stop. Oh, yeah, of course. Well, being from Baltimore, I think that's even
Yeah.
more relevant. But yeah, Stavi is a. I don't know if people like him, but they know of him. So
Okay. No, I was just curious.
yeah. Um. So yeah, I thought maybe, and I'll just say both of us watched the movie independently, but on the same day, apparently last weekend. So it's still somewhat fresh in my mind, but I'm gonna have to refresh myself at certain points if we bring up certain characters' names, and I apologize if I screw those up. So,
Sure.
yep. Anyway,
Well,
yep.
yeah, there are a lot of ways we could get started on a conversation. The thing that for me seemed most most prominent is that Nolan has a very distinct aesthetic. And I haven't seen all of his movies. I've seen Memento and the 3 Batman movies, and I think that's everything by him I've seen. So I don't know if this is the same thing in, in what's the Oppenheimer, that's the name of the film.
Oppenheimer. Yeah.
Yeah, so online, there was a lot of discussion about Agamemnon's, his armor looking kind of like Batman. And I wondered, in a way, everything about the film kind of resembles Batman, but
Mm.
it's done in a different way. I'm not saying the film is like him remaking Batman, but I just I thought the aesthetic of that was distinct, and so yeah, that's sort of where most of what I was thinking about kind of goes to is those similarities, the way that he has kind of a more realistic interpretation of what's happening. The individual scenes often are a little more gritty. A mirror is being held up rather than an idealized vision. Even his uh, portrayal of Athena seems to be more in line with a contemporary view of how a revelation would occur, rather than what we see in the poem. And what I mean by that is in the poem, Athena is like a very full character. and she's got her own appearance and so on and so forth. In the movie, we learn that Zendaya was somebody who was in Troy, and was killed, and it seems to be that Athena is representing herself in that image in order to teach something to Odysseus about Zeus's law as it's portrayed in the film.
Yes.
So
I think I think one of the first texts I sent to you after I watched the movie was, "What's the deal with Zendaya?" Because
yeah,
firstly, she's been in pretty much every movie, as have Tom Holland and John Bernthal and Robert Pattinson, right? And I know Nolan has used. I think Pattinson was the star of Tenet, or at least he was a big character in that one. Although I haven't seen Tenet. Um, of course, yes, as you mentioned, Nolan did the Batman movies, and I'll admit I'm not the biggest Batman fan, even though I don't mind it, but I just kind of didn't understand the just the popularity of those movies as much as I think they're great movies. It's just everybody seems to fawn over them. But in terms of his work that I enjoy even more, it would be like Inception is one of my favorite movies. Interstellar, even Dunkirk. Uh, but I think Oppenheimer, as you mentioned, might be my favorite just because the subject matter is very uh, pertinent to my own interests. And maybe we'll record an episode about that. But as far as going back to the Odyssey and Athena in particular, I just felt like her character was completely different than what was represented in the poem itself, right? And
yeah.
I was
I
confused.
mean, it's well, okay. So, I think she at one point helps him disguise himself. I might be misremembering that,
Hmm.
but in the poem, she is very much a full character,
Yeah.
and the representation of her isn't something that you can secularize away. The poem is written in a different culture. The way that he's portrayed her in the film, we see that thing of him reaching out and like trying to hold her hand or something, and
Mm.
she's not really there, and it's probably a that's a very more contemporary way of portraying uh that than it was done in antiquity.
Yeah. And, the other gods were also just as present in the poem.
Mhm.
So, like, for example, Zeus, right? He talks,
Yeah.
Poseidon. Um, so they were kind of left out of the movie, which was again the confusing part for me was not having read the Odyssey lately, not in the last 20 years. It was just funny seeing Athena being personified. At least Odysseus could see her, but nobody else could.
Right.
Um, and from my understanding, there's more of a backstory as to why he was essentially banished to Calypso in the first place. Possibly had to do with well, I don't want to say the word for YouTube, but something happened to Athena's daughters by some of the men in the war, and
Mhm.
anyway, Athena eventually comes around to Odysseus and wants to help him, and basically all the gods want to help him except Poseidon. I felt it would have been just as interesting to include more gods, at least in the same sort of vague. Well, can people really see this god? Is it a god or is it a person? That was interesting, but just having it be one character, I guess for a general audience, I don't know. I think
Right.
might have been a ploy to cast that actress.
It might have been.
That's a cynical
Um,
take, but
mhm.
I understand.
I do think that whenever what I think of as like the more mythic elements appear in the film, like the film has kind of a very mythic presentation. You're very much transported to a time and a place that don't really exist. This world in the film, and you can tell there's maybe some type of magic or something going on, but it's also very kind of gritty and realistic. But even the Cyclops, the omission of the "nobody blinded you"
Hmm.
moment of that brings that kind of more realistic approach to that creature. We hear the creature's voice, but it's very hard to make out the words that it's saying. I don't remember being able to differentiate, And I think that that's another thing that might have been a mechanical decision. How would they represent that conversation if the Cyclops had the voice that it has in the film? Because I couldn't understand the words that it was saying at all.
Yeah. No, I don't think you were really supposed to,
Hmm.
or at least in Nolan's version, right?
Right.
Yeah, that was confusing because I remember that's one of the most famous scenes, of course, of in the Odyssey, right? Is that yes, they stumble upon this giant and they get trapped by him, but in the actual poem, they basically interact with him more, right? They talk with
Right.
him, they get him drunk,
Hmm.
right? And then Odysseus, yes, he blinds him and says his name is Nobody. Uh, Nolan took that out. He kept the part about the dressing up as sheep thing in
Right.
there, but the arrow at the end apparently wasn't in the original, right? It
Hmm.
was actually he just eventually says what his name actually was after they escape his cave in the original, and that was his folly. So I read something about it because I was like, why wouldn't you include that in the movie? Because it was such a clever way of of handling the situation, right? And
Hmm.
Nolan basically said, I just I just felt it didn't translate to be towards a movie, and it's
Well,
like
I mean, again,
I got it.
it's something that puts a definite. It's a more contemporary kind of thing. More of those more mythic moments or kind of clever moments from the story didn't really seem to translate to the film. For instance, when they talk about Penelope unraveling the tapestry
Mm.
in the context of the film, not many of those men seem to be the kind of people who would wait for a tapestry. And if the tapestry was not was staying equivalent each day, there might be something to question there.
Yeah.
But in the movie, that's portrayed as a very valid reason, and it just doesn't. It's not. That was something that brought me out of the movie, like when Pattinson's talking to her and says, like, I know you're unraveling it.
Mm.
Um, it's like, well, he's literally seeing the tapestry in front of him. He would be able to tell if the tapestry was not getting longer, you know?
Yes, there were several other moments like that in the movie. Now, I don't want this to become a criticism of the movie necessarily because I actually did enjoy it quite a lot just for its entertainment value. And I thought that it's amazing that he still films on real film,
Yeah.
and the ships are real. The actors are basically out in the water. They're getting pelted by the sun and the water and all of that. They don't really use. He doesn't use a sound stage necessarily. It's great to see them film on location, and I thought it had this realism, but in some ways, it's like, yeah, it is modernized, and sure, it's a movie. It's his adaptation of the story. He's allowed to do what he wants. But I think going back to what you said about Zeus's law, because that's one of those things that was mentioned, I think, 2 dozen times in the movie was Zeus's law, which is basically do unto others, right?
Well, that's I've seen things over the past week that have specifically pointed at that and questioned whether that's a fair representation of what Zeus's law was
Hmm.
at that time.
Hmm.
So that do unto others thing, I think, is a more Christian kind of, in a cultural way. I'm not saying Nolan is proselytizing or evangelizing, um, but
Yeah, I know. That's what I was wondering. I was like, they basically made it into do unto others, which
mhm,
is a big part of the Bible and obviously the golden rule. Um, but yeah, going back to what Zeus's law actually is, it's like basically you're supposed to show hospitality to people who come into your household, right? So
mhm.
that's what the beggars were doing there. And then likewise, the beggars or the guests need to treat their hosts with respect. And I think one of the things that brought me out of it was that I remember that Odysseus in the original poem, I mean, he was a stalwart, crafty, clever, basically almost too clever
Mhm.
for his own good type
Well,
of character, right?
he lies and
Yeah,
tricks.
tricks,
He tells
right?
stories. In the original poem, a huge amount of the book, like several books of the book, are Odysseus telling the story of his exploits and his time with the witch and all of this other stuff. And as a contemporary reader, you read that it's almost a question of whether or not he's an unreliable narrator because
Right,
he has the reputation for lying and telling stories, and here he is lying and telling a story, or at least it seems like that. He's telling the story of how he went to the underworld.
right.
I mean, if somebody came up to you and told you they went to the underworld, you'd be questioning.
But and the thing is, going along with his character traits in the original, is that he doesn't really show that much remorse for his actions. Not at least not for Troy, as much as they make it seem in the movie that he's like literally regretful about
Mhm.
everything and he broke Zeus's law, and that's basically his character arc, right? Um, I'm sure there are instances where he's lamenting about things and all of that, but for the most part, I mean, he is the hero of the story, and he's this guy that fought in a war, and now he wants to get home, and he does anything he can to get there, right? And so they did change his character a bit. I understand why they did it. You can't have somebody basically just, yeah, running amok and doing everything and being kind of a, yeah. I
Right.
guess Nolan wanted to personify him a little bit more with modern audiences, but mentioning Zeus's law over and over and over again, like it was some decree that they lived by back then. Like are you, do you really think Greek people back in 800 BC were talking about Zeus's law all the time? I don't quite, I don't buy that necessarily.
I mean, I don't. It's been too long since I've read the book to say that Zeus's law does not appear in the Odyssey in the original poem, in the translation I read, but I don't remember it ever appearing. That
That's fine.
entire
Yeah.
aspect of Odysseus kind of plays into this question of a more cultural Christianity appearing in the book or in the movie, excuse me. Because
Mm.
that he it's not that he doesn't feel the capacity for guilt, but that compassion uh for Troy in that way, I think is very much that's a more contemporary thing,
Yeah.
or at least to portray it in art like that is more contemporary.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree. Um, there were other things in the movie that I felt were a bit confusing along the same lines of why, for example, Penelope's character, very famously at the end to test, whether he was Odysseus or not, or test the suitors, right? Aside from the arrow test, where he had to string his bow and shoot it through the 12 axes, very famously, there was an olive tree bed that
Mhm.
that basically Odysseus had made for their palace, and he knew that nobody could move it, right? And she was testing the suitors. That was thrown out. Um, I don't know. I didn't read why, but I thought that would have been interesting as well. I thought it was a little bit. So while I'll say this, I thought some of the scenes at the end were a little bit silly, and I don't know if we want to get into spoilers necessarily. I don't know if folks have
I
watched the
have a
movie.
feeling the video or the movie is so huge that it doesn't
Good,
matter.
because I was going to say,
Yeah.
then if you don't want to be spoiled, but it's a 2800 year or old poem at this point, right? 800
It
BC.
is it is a
Yeah,
lot of people seem
people.
to think that they've read it and haven't actually, I will say that.
Yeah,
I've talked to people who have seen the video and they read, adaptations when they were young about the poem. I remember in college talking to people, and it became very evident to me that people hadn't actually read the original poem. They had been reading either these child adaptations or remembering a movie they saw or something.
yeah.
But generally, the ideas of the story are pretty present in
Right.
culture.
So the scene at the end where Odysseus, Matt Damon, is basically slaughtering all of the suitors was a little bit funny to me because they had to make him into an old man. right?
Mhm.
Because he's been out for 20 years, right? 10 years in the war and basically 10
Right.
years banished. Um, so they kind of had this like gray makeup on and like the hair looked older. And then he kind of had a slight arch to his back. You could tell that that was his direction. But then he's just basically like slaughtering like people like in a video game.
Yeah.
You know how in video games, in fight scenes, right? You don't want all of the enemies to pile up on the character like 360, right? Because in real life, that's kind of what you would do. Like one
Right.
person can't take out 20 people in a small room. But it kind of, I was looking at the extras and like the background actors. They're all kind of standing there like waiting their turn. I was like, you're telling me not one of these dudes could just like chuck
Jump
something
in.
at him and then the other guy's bum rush. I get
Yeah.
he's supposed to be, a divinely powerful uh, character. But the way that they did it in the movie, I know that they had to have like a climax, and that was like our payoff, right? That
Right.
he's this still a badass, and everybody was doubting him. But that was a little bit weak for me,
Right.
personally. So again, not a criticism of the movie as a whole. I really thought Matt Damon, for example, while he didn't look Greek at all, and I can say that as a Greek myself, I have a very keen eye for who has those types of features. Apparently he's got Irish ancestry or
Okay.
you know
I have no
Northern
idea.
European. Yeah, I not that I care too much, but aside from the fact that he didn't quite look the part, he acted very well, and I think he might have been, yeah, the best part of the
Well,
movie.
he carried the movie. I mean, he was the central character, but he fulfilled his end of the bargain,
Right?
I thought,
Yeah.
you know.
Um, I felt that Tom Holland, for example, was, I don't know what you think. I He kind of didn't didn't do it for me, and I'm
I
not.
think there was a weakness in the
Yeah,
character.
yeah,
For Odysseus to be essentially divine and Tom Holland to be normal,
hmm,
that Telemachus should have something about him. He is
yeah,
the sun. He can't do X, Y, and Z. He doesn't do the stringing of the bow in the poem. But I felt that um he was just like a little kid
like a
with a
dwarf.
great dad,
Yeah, he
and
was a
it's
twerpy
it's kind
kid.
of
I
yeah,
mean, the first four books of the Odyssey don't even mention Odysseus. It's all about Telemachus, right?
yeah.
Or Telemachus. I don't know how you're supposed to
I'd probably Telemachus, but
Telemachus,
it's
but it's
yeah,
okay. Uh, and it's mostly about Telemachus and Athena, and then setting up some of the.
yeah,
It begins in media res, right? So it's in the
right,
beginning of the story, and then we get to Odysseus, who then describes what happened in the past. Um, but yeah, it's almost the story is almost more so about Telemachus, right? He's
right,
like that's who's going to take over, and basically this whole idea of whether he's going to take over the throne. That's the whole driving point of the story. It's like
mhm,
who's going to rule this kingdom, or is that the family just doomed, and Penelope has to basically take a suitor. Um, so I felt like that might not have been the strongest casting point, and maybe the weakness of the character and the writing itself could have. Yeah, I'll
I
leave
mean,
that to the
I
actual film
don't
critic.
think that Nolan's as good a writer as the collection of bards that was what we call Homer.
Well,
Um,
certainly not for women, and
yeah,
I I don't necessarily want to bash the guy too much because he's a great filmmaker. But if you've seen Oppenheimer or basically any of his other movies, I don't know what it is with this guy, but there ain't too much romance in his movies, and when he tries to put it in there, it's awkward and it's almost like let's just get that out of the way, and yeah, you got
mhm,
your one little like flirty scene, okay. I felt like with the Odyssey, there was multiple points. For example, Odysseus and Calypso, they're sleeping together. She's
right,
not just drugging the dude for 10 years.
mhm,
Um, Also with Circe, the witch, right? For a year, he actually lives with her and becomes her
right,
lover, and then that's how he eventually converts his men back into pigs. I mean, back out from being pigs. So Nolan basically just said, I'm not going to include anything that's, yeah, we're not going to include romance
I
in here.
think that
There's
was
Penelope's
I
enough.
think that was something that Emily Wilson was criticizing.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, she said there's no sex, and I wasn't sure whether she was saying in Homer or in the movie, because there's not any contemporary sex in Homer, but he does discuss that Odysseus is with other women. That's something that's happening,
Mhm.
and it is a major part of his character. It doesn't appear to be a major part of his character in 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 the movie. It's
Right.
not given. uh he's totally at the mercy of the Lotus when he's with
Right.
Calypso.
And
And that's not in the poem really, I don't think. Not like
definitely
that
not.
anyway.
Yes, there. I looked it up. There is mention of the lotus in certain parts, but it certainly
Yeah.
isn't the main reason why
No, I
he's,
well, I mean,
yeah,
he's
with her.
definitely with other women. I remember when I was in school, that was something that we talked about,
Mm.
that was part of the character.
Mm.
Um, he's not particularly noble. He's cunning,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
But you don't go for to Odysseus for an example of nobility,
Exactly.
like you might the Aeneid, or something like that. Aeneas is much more in line with nobility.
Hmm. In some ways, what is it? John Bernthal's character,
Is that the Punisher guy?
yeah, the Punisher guy. I
Okay.
what his, the king,
I don't remember which king it was.
Leonidas. What is it?
Yeah.
John Bernthal Odyssey. Sorry, I want to get this character name right. Menelaus, king of
Yeah.
Sparta. Right, that's what I was
Mhm.
saying. He was like the big king of Sparta. He's a more kingly figure than Odysseus is in the movies for sure. And I liked his character a lot, actually, even though I didn't quite. Maybe I just skipped over it in my head, but I was like, wait,
I thought that was
who's
a
he
good
supposed to be?
scene
Yeah.
when he was talking with Telemachus.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I thought that was a good scene.
I thought that was excellent, and even the very short scene with Troy, right?
Mhm.
Um, who again, it's funny because everybody says like she's the one that, yeah, she's the reason for the Trojan War, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, but she's only in there for like a tiny amount. But that that was great. I thought his character was excellent. I thought, yeah, Telemachus learning from him, and uh, John Berthel not quite telling him all the information, or basically saying, "Hey, kid, what do you know? Like, I can tell you rumors, but yeah, we don't really, yeah, we're not gonna get any answers today, but I'll let you know when I hear it."
Right.
But then it kind of evolved into like, yeah, he's almost raising Telemachus a little bit, in his own image. It was interesting. I wish there was actually a little bit more of that. Um, I guess we should probably briefly, because I mentioned Troy and we mentioned the Trojan War,
Sure.
might want to talk about the horse. Um,
I mean, I don't know. I don't remember a specific scene with the Trojan horse in the Odyssey. It's not really a big part of the poem. That
mhm,
for it to start in the movie, I thought was actually a very good decision because it immediately breaks with the poem.
mhm,
So you go into the movie knowing this is not
mhm,
a classic. This is something new. And on top of that, the way the horse is portrayed, it's like something out of a Stanley Kubrick film. These very wide shots and this
mhm.
almost surreal image of the thing coming out of the sand. So I thought that was pretty good.
I thought the juxtaposition of those really wide shots, and then the camera would then zoom inside of it to see the
Yeah.
men basically stacked on top of each other in the most claustrophobic shots ever, right? And you see them drowning and
Hmm.
having to still be quiet. Uh, that was incredibly powerful. I mean, and as much as, yeah, I looked it up again, it's really not mentioned much in the original poem.
No, no. I
It's kind
mean,
of an offhand comment.
It's been a long time since I've
Yeah,
read the poem, but I there is not a major scene with the Trojan horse. It's
right,
also not mentioned in the Iliad. It's not the focus, so it's something that kind of happens outside of Homer.
right. But it's interesting how we all collectively were like, okay, where's the horse? Everyone knows
Right.
about the horse, right?
Well, I mean, again, for it to start in the movie is good because, like we were saying, a lot of the actual poem is Odysseus telling a king, um, his journey.
Hmm.
And from a contemporary reader, I don't know if this was the case. There's some complex narrative stuff going on in the poem. It's amazing that it's that old. But for instance, starting in Media Ray. But yeah, I mean, what was I going to say? Oh, it's hard to accept that Odysseus is not an unreliable narrator.
Hmm.
I mean, coming into this from reading Proust and Joyce and these writers where unreliability is the name of the game. Everything is subjective. And then you go back in time and he's telling this story and he's going into the underworld and then meeting these fantastical creatures. Like, this has got to be unreliable. But I mean, I don't know if that was a thing then. It was just something that was tossed around a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't know personally. I'm not an expert
Mhm.
in Greek literature or what was going
Right.
on around Homer's time.
Speaking of
Yeah.
which, I want to make a point and say that I had a minor in classics and there was exposure to classic languages. Uh, I never read Homeric Greek. I
Mhm.
tried at one point, I think, to see if I could, what little I knew, make it count and get something out of it. And if any regular YouTuber, like somebody who does not have a degree specifically in classics or specifically in ancient Greek. And I'm not saying contemporary Greek because Homeric Greek is a very unique vocabulary and they're talking about translation. That person does not know what they're talking about. They're talking about whether the
Mm.
translation resonated with them, just like with Bible translations. You have to have a certain level of expertise in the field to make a competent judgment as to what is a good translation according to what criteria. And I've definitely seen YouTubers talk about the translation, and it's like this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Like I'm not saying I'm good at this, and it's been like I said, like 20 years since I read the Odyssey, um, but these people don't know what they're talking about.
Well, yeah. I think in the preparation for this podcast episode, yeah, you talked a lot about the translations, and
Yeah.
I didn't really realize this was a controversy, but I can certainly
Well,
see.
people are. I mean, you want to say that it seems to be just because it's by a woman. Because the big
Mm,
translations are Fagel's because he came out more recently, but in classics departments, your professors are not going to be reading Fagel's with you.
hmm.
They're going to be looking at Lattimore or something like that. The whole criteria is different. If you want to actually see these a good execution, it's not just what is selling the most.
Yeah, and for the maybe for the uninformed who are listening to this, Emily Wilson's translation came out in 2017, I believe. I
Mhm.
think it's the most recent, contemporary translation that's most people know. And I looked into it a little bit, and it makes so some of the YouTubers that I listen to, not many, but like there's a few that mentioned some people are a little upset that her version famously begins with, for example, Odysseus was a complicated man. I think
Mhm.
that's like the famous change that she had made right in the very beginning. And that, for some reason, makes it into a feminized version of the Odyssey. I don't think I really buy it, but when you look at the lists of people who have done translations for this or have written books about it, they're all men, aside
Mhm.
from her. I mean, for the most part. Uh, so it gave me kind of uneasy vibe, I guess. When I looked, I was like, I don't want to get down into this. Like, the women really, are they allowed to make translations? Well, of course they are, and being a woman or a man, does that color your perception of the story? I don't know, maybe. Um, but we can probably agree that the people who wrote, if it was people, I don't know,
Mhm.
who wrote the Odyssey probably were all
Well,
men.
yeah, no, my understanding is that it's probably a group of people.
Mm,
There are indications in the later books, I think, that they were added later. I don't know the poem well enough to comment on that.
hmm
Um, uh, there are so in the poem, people are described with those phrases after them. You know,
hmm
Odysseus was a complicated man,
Okay.
and so that appears a few times throughout the poem. Things like that are done to make recitation easier.
hmm
So you're always filling in for a certain poetic meter, and you've got these moments where you know the description of the thing because it's always the same description, and so you can build your rhythm like that. So it's obvious the poem wasn't written down, if or not by the author. It was something that was performed.
Yeah,
So
is
just
orated.
by having that be one of the things we can identify about it, it makes it much less likely that it was one person.
Right.
I think that's something that's going on, but I don't you know I classics to me was something that it was like, oh, I can do this at school, and it's interesting, but it's not my life. So it's been a long time since I've really engaged with this.
Yeah. No, I could never have studied this, like sat down and just been like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna spend months of
No,
my
I,
life,
I I
right?
mean it's a valid pursuit, but it's
Oh,
not.
sure, but it's
Mhm,
not for me.
mhm,
But approaching middle life here, mid age, I should say. I've been starting to read. If people have listened to the last podcast where we talked about religion,
mhm,
I mentioned I was reading the Bible, and I thought it was interesting that um, much of the Old Testament, it was written across a long period of
mhm,
time, but kind of like the meat and potatoes, aside from maybe the very early books. But the ones I'm reading right now, I'm at Kings, First, Second Kings, and it's talking about David and Solomon, and they were all around 700-800 BC. It's exactly the same time period that the Odyssey and Iliad were written, and it's pretty fascinating to me. Obviously, in a different language, right? So, um, but then of course the Bible was written in Greek as well, the
mhm.
New Testament, but then it was translated as well by the Septuagint, right? The 70 scholars. And so you mentioned Homeric Greek, and I guess the Bible is written a lot of it was written in Koine Greek, right? That
Mhm.
was I guess what was popular at the time, and then it was translated into another version of Greek. So there's lots of different variations of Greek, which have caused all these translation issues in the past, and that's why we
Right.
have tons of Bible translations. And when I read the Bible, for example, I try to read it in at least two translations at once. Like I have one on the left that I'm most comfortable with, just because it's probably the easiest to understand. Then I have the more, I guess, like word to word, accurate one to the right, and then usually I'll have maybe one or two that one might have a more evangelical approach, one might have more of a Protestant approach, et cetera, or one might be a little bit more worldly. Um, I don't know if I've seen anything like that with the Odyssey. I feel like it would be great if you could get
So there
translations
is
next to each other.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think the thing that you're most likely to find for the true amateur scholar is the Loeb books of the Odyssey.
hmm
And do you know what Loeb is?
I do not.
Okay. Loeb is a publishing company. I think it's affiliated with Harvard or one of those schools in the Northeast.
Mm.
But they have a huge library, a few hundred books. But it's one side of the page is an English translation, and the other side of the page is the ancient. And
Yeah.
so they have Greek and Latin books. They might have others, but those are the only ones I've seen. But I mean, I remember when I was working on my tech degree, there was a guy who used to work in the IT office at the college, and he was an amateur. He was an amateur Latin scholar, as in like a person who reads Latin for
Nice.
fun. And he had his lobes back there. He had one or two of them. I remember seeing them. Like I didn't expect to see that here, but I think that's what you're most likely to see for a person who's exploring that. You know.
Yeah, I took Latin in high school.
Hmm.
If I can just throw that out there, it makes me
Yeah.
sound all sophisticated, and it was kind of a joke, but actually a really fun class, and
Hmm.
um, maybe one of the most enjoyable classes, just because nobody took it too seriously, including the teacher himself.
Hmm.
But he did say that, yeah, he was required to actually learn a bit of Latin, and he doesn't go out to Latin conferences, but there's actually a contingent of people to this day that apparently, this might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever,
Hmm.
but they got together at Latin conferences and just spoke in Latin.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know if I've heard of that, but I'm not
that's
surprised
what
by
he
that at
said.
all. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Um, it's probably like knowing Esperanto or something.
Or Klingon.
One thing is that it's going to be difficult even to talk about certain subjects, so they use what's called dog Latin, because the whole
Mm,
modern world did not exist when Latin was spoken. So Latin is a language by which you go hunting, you invade cultures. It is a language by which you might have certain religious practices, but
mm.
it's not a language by which you download instant messenger. So they need to have a whole vocabulary for using Microsoft Word on the computer, because it just simply was not. It wasn't what you talked
Yes.
about.
There's no loan words because all of our words were
Yeah,
translated, came from Latin and Greek. So it's not the other way around.
yeah.
Whereas there is modern Greek, of course, and there's tons of English loan words in there, and it makes it easier for me to understand. And that's not to say that I understand modern Greek very well, but when I was a kid, it was spoken to me all the time, and I just sort of was like, I could pick up a little bit. But it is amazing when you go. The only thing I can really do now
Hmm.
is I can pronounce ancient Greek because I know the letter sounds. The letters are mostly the same, right? And
Hmm.
they have pretty much the same sound. I think. I mean, somebody might fact check me there, but in terms of the actual meaning of the words and the way
I know
it's
word
constructed,
meanings have changed.
yeah,
I think the
yeah,
word kala means like good, but it used to
yeah,
mean beautiful or something. Or there are shades of meaning
yeah,
that they've changed over 2,000 years.
yeah,
Um,
and sure, and the big issue in the Bible translations, or at least people like to make it an issue, is do you translate servant into slave, right?
mhm,
What does it actually mean? There's a lot of talk about um, men, right? The Bible's a very masculine story, book,
mhm,
but does that word actually mean just men or boys, or does it apply to both men and women? Does it apply to everybody? And so some translations are much more liberal when it comes to that. Some of them, just say no, they're just talking to the men, but it can apply to anybody, etc. So, yeah, I can imagine what a nightmare it must be to try to translate something, not even just an orally transmitted story, right? According to oral tradition, that's been passed down from generation to generation. That's also got meaning lost, over time. But then having to deal with the fact that it's a poem, right? So
mhm.
it's in some kind of crazy meter, and the words could have been arranged a certain way for a certain reason. Maybe we don't quite know why, or we don't understand the translation of a sentence, but we can kind of get it from the context. It is interesting, and of course, people spend their lives doing it. Um, anyway, with that being said, obviously, I don't think Christopher Nolan went and studied ancient Greek for his movie,
No, me neither.
right? So,
The most recent nitpick that I saw was that the tide goes up when the people are in the horse. and people drown because of it.
Mm.
In the Mediterranean, the tide is only 10 centimeters. And that has to
Yeah,
do with the way
that's true.
that the oceans apparently transport water or something. And this
Hmm.
is more up your alley. You're the science guy, but yeah. So the movement of waters don't really allow for a drastic tide, and so
Mm.
in reality, that's a 10 centimeter gap. Those people would not have drowned, but
Yes, that's actually truly fascinating to think about now that I'm like because my wife is from Turkey.
uh
We try to go back there every year, and I don't think I ever remember the water really changing very much
no,
from day to day.
it's a
It's
10
like
centimeter
I've
at the
never thought
highest.
about that.
I saw a video on YouTube yesterday, and
Huh.
I mean, what do you expect? You know, it's a Hollywood movie, but there are so many little errors in this movie.
Well,
It's kind of astounding.
and
That's why I think it's so important to note that it sort of takes place outside of the world.
yeah, I,
You know, when, like I said, like right when the movie starts, you know this horse thing in the sand is very surreal. You know it's not the poem exactly. Um, there's definitely
yeah,
an aesthetic. I was thinking of if I were to try to name it like mythic realism or something, but it definitely bears something in common with how Batman differs from the comic books of Batman.
mm,
Um, I don't know if you remember Dan. I don't want to say his last name
yes,
on the thing, but Dan from high school.
hmm,
I remember when the first Nolan Batman movie came out. He's like, I liked it, but it was nothing like the comic books, and it wasn't a good comic book movie. Like he said that
yeah,
he actually preferred the Batman with the Jack Nicholson Joker.
yeah. The more campy Batman,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Mhm.
what Nolan brought to the Batman series. As far as I know, that's why it was so popular. He made it dark and gritty and
Right.
more realistic or whatever.
Mhm.
And Heath Ledger's Joker is not some basically
He's Tom
clown, right?
Waits.
Yeah, he's like he's just a
No,
dude.
seriously, if you ever watch Tom Waits and then
Tom
the
Waits.
Joker,
Yeah,
it's the same guy.
that's I can see that easily. Yeah,
Yeah.
hell yeah. Um, but I no, I actually agree because again, I'm not like I'm not trying to say that the Batman movies were bad again, but I grew up reading the comics
Mhm.
and also watching the really campy Batman cartoons from like
Yeah.
the 70s or
When
whatever.
yeah, then
Yeah,
okay.
whatever. No, I watched the like really old
Old
ones
ones.
and
Yeah, I used
then
to watch Adam West after school.
yeah,
On TV Land, they had it at, like, 4 o'clock or
yeah,
something, so
the one where he's like in tights and carrying a bomb like above
yeah.
his head. Yeah. But then the Mark Hamill cartoons were on in the 90s, which I still think are some of like the best voice acting in any cartoon ever. Um, and those were great. And then I actually speaking of kind of being brought out of the movie a little bit, another critique I have heard, and I'll be honest with you, I did not pick up on this in the movie, although my wife did, was that the children call their parents dad.
Mhm.
Telemachus says dad, not father, you
Mhm.
know, not sir, just, you know, and a lot of people are like, why are they speaking like they're, Gen Z teenagers or something, right?
Mhm.
Also, the other thing I noticed more so, again, this is like such a silly thing, but like most of the actors, I think most, if not all, had American accents, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to think if
Well,
there are any.
John Leguizamo, I mean, his accent is John Leguizamo, like, I mean,
Uh,
is he
he's
Puerto
in
Rican,
like
I think?
yeah, he has like a New
So
York
he
kind
has, like, a
of
very yeah,
yeah, like
I'm not I think John Leguizamo has some really crappy movies, he's got some pretty decent movies. I thought he was very good in the movie, I'm not criticizing him, but
yeah.
it's clear that his accent is not Grecian.
No, and all of these people, you know how in some, I think it was, what was it, the Odyssey movie that was made a little while, like 20 years ago with Brad Pitt or whatever. I forget. And there were
Mhm,
other movie adaptations. It seemed like those used more like stentorian type speech, whereas
mhm,
they didn't even try to make this, like a transatlantic type thing, or
Yeah.
this was just American, even though Christopher Nolan is British. So
Okay. I didn't even know it was British,
I
honestly.
think he is. I
Okay.
could be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong, but I think I've heard him speak in an accent, um, and or he's Irish or something, right?
Mhm.
He did Dunkirk, but I just it kind of made me feel a little bit like, ooh, this is like it sounds so modernized and
Mhm.
a little bit like they needed that, like how in Star Wars, for example, all of like the really like threatening, imposing characters like on the Death Star and all that, and even James Earl Jones kind of speaks with this like cadence that you don't you don't think of him as like the Bell Atlantic guy. You think of him
Right.
as an evil
Darth Vader.
dictator. Yeah. So there just wasn't much of that,
Right.
and that's okay. But yeah, it's just an interesting choice. It's like the
Mhm.
acting was good, except
Well, I think the costumes, I remember seeing pictures online of the hunting costumes with Telemachus, and he's going hunting with somebody, and there's something about the costumes that feels almost like Star Warsy. But
yeah,
at the same time, the dark colors and the lack of metallic shine, is they're not wearing
no,
it kind of makes them less
cheap.
stand out. I think I don't think it cheapens it. I think it makes it makes it blend in with everything else a little better. There is
I
the
felt.
downside of Agamemnon's Batman helmet, but many of these decisions I think were done intelligently. I don't know. I don't.
I
I didn't think the costuming was actually negative. I thought it was
Okay,
mostly done pretty well.
and that's fine. I know that there are some people that don't mind it. For me, I guess for I guess for me, I would assume that like these guys that are basically they weren't technically riding chariots or whatever, but they look like
Mhm.
they could be,
Well, I
like
remember one
Romans.
thing. So you see, like Elon Musk talks about how we need to make a historical AI Odyssey,
Mm,
and I remember when I was in school learning that the way the battles are described in the Iliad was anachronistic in Homer.
yeah,
The chariots or whatever that they were riding in the Iliad did not exist or not in that form during the 400 years prior, or whatever it was that the Trojan War took place. So it's better in a way if the film exists ahistorically. If it's in this
yeah.
this kind of other not real time and place.
Well, there's a question of whether the Trojan War even existed or really happened,
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't I don't know, but I mean, like, I do remember that I had a teacher who was like, "No, that was not the way that battles were conducted."
Right. Certainly not. And there probably were wars around the time of 500 years before the Iliad. 500 years, and then you write a book or a poem about it. A
Mhm.
lot of things are going to be changed, and no one is really going to remember what actually happened, right? So then, and that's the thing. I think the movie could have done. It could have been made a little bit more so, like it could have included the gods. We could have known right off the bat, like, okay, we're gonna go like mythological with this,
Yeah.
or we're going to go like hyper realistic with this. Instead, it sort of struck this kind of in between tone of like, is this supposed to be like in the realm of gods, or is this in the realm of the real, or I didn't quite understand. By the end, of course, it was obvious,
Mhm.
pretty much what they were going for, but I kind of had wished right off the bat we would have just been like presented with
I mean,
what
I
to
didn't
expect.
I think, the younger generation just kind of gets shortchanged in the movie, both Zendaya and Tom Holland. I didn't like the way that Athena was portrayed. I didn't think it was, I would have liked to have her be more of a character. Um,
Yeah.
Tom Holland's character, does seem very much plucky, young, doesn't really know what's going
Seems like
on.
Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
guess. I haven't actually seen any of his Spider-Man movies,
oh,
but I
but
believe it. Yeah.
he's Peter Parker. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no problem. He's a great Peter Parker. Um, and
He doesn't give off the
Zendaya is a she's Dune. She's in Dune.
mhm,
Whatever her character is, she looks like she's in Dune. If she had one of those nose
nose
pieces,
head things.
yeah, she'd be. That's it.
Yeah.
She had the same kind of like shawl on her head, but she just needed the nose thing. Talk about spice, and we're good.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I
We've
is
been
there
talking
anything?
for I think
Yeah.
about an hour, so we should probably wrap this up.
Yep. Been 55 minutes according to my recording. So yeah, I guess I'll just give my last conclusion,
Sure.
whatever, and I'll just say anyone who's listening to this, I don't think you need us to recommend you to go watch this movie, but in case you're looking for that just slight extra push, impetus to go,
Oh, I mean,
I would say do it.
I feel funny a bit like Zizek whenever he says that he likes something, he immediately criticizes the hell out of it.
Uh huh.
I it is we've spent most of the movie talking about the things that we would have done differently, but I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
It was a fun time. It did not really feel like 3 hours to me. Um, I had to use the restroom once, so there was like a 2-minute period I missed the movie. But with a 3-hour movie, you've gotta take that. Um, so maybe
Yeah.
I would have liked an intermission of some sort,
They
but
could have made an intermission
yeah.
because if IMAX has these giant film canisters that it's filmed on, and it can
Yeah,
only
yeah.
hold so many of these, and each one of them are like 40 pounds, for example,
Mhm.
and they can only hold like 15 minutes of footage or something at a time. So an IMAX movie can only be up to 3 hours long. Literally, the projectors cannot handle it any more than
Okay.
that. So I was just thinking, just like you said, it's like, it's a big ask for people to sit in the theater for 3 hours and not have to get up just briefly, right? It'd be great if they could bring back intermissions if
I
we're going to be
I
doing
don't
this long movie
I
thing.
I don't watch regular TV anymore. I don't think most people do. Everything for
No.
me is YouTube or similar apps and websites. And at home, like I don't watch when we were growing up, everything was in half hours. If I don't have a whole lot of 20-year-old viewers and younger, but it's probably odd for a 20-year-old to think about that's how TV used to be. Everything was half hour, an hour.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah,
It was a big
that's
deal when a sitcom had like a double episode, right? And
yeah,
then even with double episodes, you'd still have like 20 minutes of commercials. So you
mhm,
basically had like 44 minutes of actual, you know, screen
yeah,
time. Um anyway, uh yes, go see the movie, and thanks for talking about this with me,
yep,
Mark. It was nice bouncing ideas off of you, and hope to be on this channel again pretty soon.
okay.
All right.